Hello and welcome to a very special edition of MMO Weekly. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, presented always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. And I'm joined today by former MLB agent. You may know him best for the Bobby Bonilla contract with the Mets, but so much more. We're joined by Dennis Gilbert. Dennis, thank you so much for taking some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
So it's a pleasure.
Same here. And I know before we started going, you had asked if I was a Mets fan, a big Mets fan. I am. Big Mets fan. They're not doing great right now, like we were kind of talking about off camera, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But obviously, like we said, Dennis, we have you here. Want to get your insight as far as, what you've done as far as being a sports agent, working in baseball, and things like that. And before we get into the kind of the specifics of the Bonilla contract and deferred contracts, I have a lot of questions. I think it's super interesting that I want to ask you. I first want to kind of give our listeners, obviously, a background about yourself. And I was reading through an article that you did, an interview you did with Ben Verlander of Fox Sports a couple of years back. And you started off, as I was reading, in insurance business, and you went from in the insurance business to becoming an MLB agent. So I saw a little bit as far as your dealings with the Brett family. I was wondering if you can kind of delve into that a little bit for us and give a little detail how you went from doing that to becoming an MLB agent.
Interestingly enough, I started out as a player. And I went from being a player to going into the insurance business.
Right.
Okay. And who do you sell when you're selling insurance? Are the people you know. Because I played baseball, grew up in the baseball business. I was selling some insurance to former teammates, people I knew through the game. But I never left the insurance business. That's what I'm doing today. And selling Bobby Bonilla plans.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about how your involvement with the Brett family and helping George Brett out with some sort of contract negotiations? How that kind of led you into the world of representing players as an agent?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Well, I was teammates with Ken Brett,
Sure,
who just passed away. Teammates with John Brett, another, and very, very close friends with Bobby Brett, who was starting an talked about starting an agency, doing real estate investments for ball players. Bobby and I had, similar feelings that these guys were coming out of the game broke, or a few years after they played, they had no money at all.
right.
So we were real concerned about that, and we thought that we would watch the players' backs financially. And after we started, Bobby dropped out. Just didn't really like working with. Didn't like working with the players as much as I did. Bobby was also a minor league baseball player, so the Brett family were full of baseball players.
That's awesome. That's really cool. If there's one family to know, right? That's a big one there. That's pretty awesome. I guess from there, obviously you started Beverly Hills Sports Council. Obviously, you had some big time players like Barry Bonds, Jose Canseco, Mike Piazza, obviously Bobby Bonilla, like we know. Is there a difference now between players from say the 80s and the 90s to now, as far as their understanding, as far as how to maximize their dollar with their image, so to speak, and like maximizing their potential and their best playing days, so to speak, to maximize their contracts? And is there more like financial literacy as far as what players now understanding how to make themselves more money post baseball too?
Everything's different than it was then. So let me tell you the big differences is when I wanted to reach a player, I would run to a phone booth and drop a dime or a quarter
Sure.
and try like heck to reach him. There weren't cell phones. There were no computers. It was very, very tough to reach players all the time. You found people's numbers by dialing 411.
Right.
You got endorsements by taking phone books and calling up dealerships or calling merchants. So it was a whole different business than it is today.
And
Now,
do you think like social media had a ton to do with that? That players are able to market themselves more than they ever could, right? It's I know New York is always the New York, LA, Chicago, the big markets, but with the internet, right? It's kind of any market can be a big market for a player now. You think of like Green Bay, Wisconsin, small markets, and players that could still do really well, necessarily not the marquee markets that you think of.
not only Green Bay, look at Kansas City in
Right.
football. I mean, those are like the two most watched teams in all of the NFL. So you're right. The internet has changed the life of everybody. Uh, the dollars have changed the life of everybody. So, and the game is completely different than it was back when I played. I was lucky enough as a player myself to have played for guys like Whitey Herzog
Sure.
and Dick Williams,
Right.
who were pure baseball guys. Jack McKeon, pure baseball guys. People who couldn't understand why some of the teams have done some of the ways that they've been doing today. Philosophies were completely different. But the game has changed for the better. I don't know. I still love the game. I live, eat, and sleep the game myself, even though I'm in the insurance business.
Sure.
And I deal with baseball players almost every day of my life, helping them, with these retirement type plans.
Can you talk a little bit about that as far as, not specifics or anything like that, but like what it's like helping a player along post-playing career, like you're talking about with retirement? Like what are the hurdles that like are kind of the most common for players? Is it finding a purpose, their purpose kind of post-playing? Is it finding things that they're passionate about? What would you say are like the most common kind of hurdles that you find with players, just out of retirement?
Their financial advisors.
Gotcha.
Biggest hurdles.
Sure.
These guys want to they want to control everything. Most of them are just stockbrokers that changed their names from stockbrokers to financial advisors. And how did the players get to them? Well, they got to them through a teammate.
Sure.
I mean, or through a friend, or maybe it could even be a retired player. But I see more and more of that, and everybody seems to want control.
No, I absolutely. And I guess the transition from that, another thing I kind of wanted to ask you as far as what you see the differences when you were working with players during their free agency, like guys like Barry Bonds, Bobby Bonilla, right in the 90s, like things like that. The difference between the free agent process then to now, and obviously we kind of hit on as far as with the internet and social media, I'm sure that has made a big impact in team philosophies as well. But I'm just kind of wondering if there are some things that stick out to you from the free agent process and representing players and negotiating from then to players now.
I would say that what I would do is I would take the ball players on tours, and we would go visit each city.
Okay.
I want my players to meet ownership, meet management, get a feel for what their goals were.
Right.
And even before we talk salaries. I mean, that was a lot of fun, having lunch with the Gene Autry's.
Sure.
And some of the iconic owners of the 80s and 90s. That's how I
Right.
met Barry Reinsdorf, who I actually work for today.
Sure. And what can you go through, like what a pitch is like? You know, say you're going in with a player, whatever team it might be, right? You're free agent player X, and can you kind of walk that? I don't know if every team is different as far as how they try and pitch play, free agents, but can you kind of walk through what it's like? Do they do like a slideshow? What are some things that happen as far as when free agents go and start touring teams and sit down with them?
Well, I didn't do a slideshow. What I did is having a baseball background,
Mm-hmm.
I would do through every source I could get my hands on. I'd find out the pluses and minuses of every team that we were meeting with,
Sure.
what their farm system was like. I'd know everything about the profitability of each team, and so I would know, what their market was, and what they were looking for, and I would know their need as much as they would.
Right.
Uh, to give you an example with Bonilla, we knew that the Mets were looking for a power hitter, as
Right.
was the other teams that were competing against them. And so the teams that were looking for a power hitter, like Bonilla, who could play infield and outfield,
Sure.
and he had such a great infectious, and I mean an infectious smile. They needed somebody like that to put him in a different position. So he was a good fit for them, as he was for a lot of other teams.
Sure.
And that's the way I dealt with all free agents. I wouldn't want to put somebody, as a stalking horse. I wouldn't want to waste my time, their time, or the player's time.
Sure. And another thing, obviously with the list of clients that you had represented, guys like Barry Bonds, Mike Piazza, obviously, big Mets legend. For different tiers of free agents, do you have certain teams that maybe that this player is going to be out of their price range? So, we're not going to look to maybe reach out to them, and you focus on teams more that could afford that player? Or is it a mix of teams that could afford that player, but also can use that play, as a need as well? I'm just wondering, kind of curious how that goes.
Well, interestingly enough, you helped me recall one of the most interesting times I had as a free agent was Ricky Henderson.
Okay.
And different teams were kicking the tires.
Right.
But the one team that really needed him, they were looking for, I thought they needed a veteran. And they needed a veteran, that players would respect.
Sure.
And somebody who was good in the clubhouse, and somebody who can play the outfield. So taking all that into consideration, I called Larry Lucchino, who at that time was the president of the Padres, and made a breakfast meeting and got up at 4 a.m. and drove down to San Diego because he was an early riser. We met and had like a 3-4 hour breakfast meeting, and actually made the deal in a period of time.
Wow. And that's really interesting, especially someone like Ricky Henderson, who played as long as he did, right? Which a little off topic, but that you got me thinking here. Someone like Ricky Henderson, right? I think is like the epitome of the phrase "you play until they rip the jersey off your back," right? I'm wondering, for a player like Ricky Henderson's stature, how hard is it for you to say, to see a player, right, get to a certain age? For him, he played, well into his 40s, right? But to have to look at him as as the agent and say, mate, is it time to hang it up? You're at that certain point in your career, or do you never do that? Do you always encourage that player until they say they're ready to hang him up? I'm curious how that kind of goes.
Every player is an individual.
Sure.
And with some players, you can have that conversation. Some players, you have them make the decision, and sometimes they'll ask you, what do you think?
Right.
And I actually got an awful lot of players in Japan who
Wow.
wanted to continue playing.
Sure.
at one time we had more players in Japan than all the other agencies combined. And we had over 200 major leaguers.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. Which leads me into, obviously, you know, I want to talk to you more about the deal you put together for Bobby Bonilla with the Mets. It less so for me the the parade around it, because for me it just seems like it's smart business for both sides to do a deal like that. You know, with deferred money, it just makes a lot of sense for both sides, you know, the team and the player a lot of times. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, how you got to that point within the negotiations, how you came up with that. And then secondly, since it's a practice now that, especially with big contracts, seems to be pretty commonplace, why do you think that the Bonilla contract in particular is one that still stands out about?
Oh, it was the first big one.
Gotcha.
The first big one. I mean, right on the tail of that, with the same club, I did Saberhagen.
Right.
So, I mean, it was, but the most interesting part is that when they're deferring, okay, I mean, and it goes right back to what else are they doing with their money?
Sure.
Are they just giving it to the government? And I tell players, or I used to tell players when I was their agent, we'd like to take some money out of the bank of today and put it into the bank of tomorrow. And it worked. It works
Right.
for an awful lot of people. And I got to tell you, like we said right at the beginning of your interview, you know, what's the biggest problem? It's the interference from financial advisors.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, and again, being a Mets fan, it's the Bobby Bonilla day, the history around it. It's turned into such an event now. And as a sports fan and someone who, you know, is doing this in the industry, I think to myself, again, if it's big money deals, it makes the most sense. It makes the most sense for the team, so they can continue filling a payroll every single year. They're not paying that exactly every year to help with their payroll. And for the player, like you're saying now, it's money in the bank now, but money in the bank for the future. And then, you know, years after they're done playing, they're going to be collecting a check. And, you know, you would think taken care of in that sense. It's more of a long-term commitment, which I'm sure a lot of players, if not all, once they get, you know, years into their retirement, really appreciate the fact that that was something that they did.
Well, there's, you know, that's what I'm doing today, but not only to baseball players, but, you know, putting together these plans, tying them to the S&P.
Sure.
Put a guaranteed floor on the product. Have the money compound interest.
Right.
And it also takes care of their families if they die.
Sure.
So why wouldn't why wouldn't everybody want a Bobby Bonilla plan?
Absolutely.
It's hard to figure out.
Right.
And if somebody's got a decent net worth, I'll even help them finance it. We have 12 banks that finance ball players, and they finance them non-recourse.
Wow.
So, I mean, so this is what has led to, you know, me dropping out of the agent business,
Sure,
24/7, to having a real life and being, you know, part of the #1 life insurance, retirement insurance agency in the country.
Wow. That's incredible. I have a few more questions just as far as kind of around the deal itself. One thing I have for you as far as being with, you know, as an agent, I don't know if you could speak on with the new CBA, but I was wondering if you know if you've seen any or if you've heard of any, like the biggest changes for agents now dealing with this new CBA that was struck last year. I was just kind of curious if you knew anything like that.
You know, I work with the White Sox now.
Okay.
And for the White Sox.
Sure.
So I really can't talk anything about the
understood.
CBA, but I'll tell you, the game is snappier now.
Right.
I think Manfred did a good job in speeding up the game, and
Sure.
I see that the attendance all over baseball, other than in Oakland,
Right.
seems to have picked up, and people are actually staying to the end of the game.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you exactly that about the new rules, but you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's doing exactly what baseball wants. It's made the game more exciting, more action. That's what you want. But another question that I had also, as far as and I'm circling back here because the question came back to me. You talk about financial literacy, right? The biggest thing is financial advisors, post play, and things of that nature. I don't know if you can speak on it, but there is, over the last couple of weeks, articles have come out about a firm that essentially signs prospects and forwards them money, essentially a signing bonus. And if they then make the major leagues, they get, I believe it's 8 or 10% of their salary that they make. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's just something that I read that I found was very interesting, as far as players and you talk about short-term, long-term, right? Thinking now and in the future, players that, getting a few $100,000, whatever it is, up front, but then someone like Eli De La Cruz on the Reds is someone who has signed this, and someone now that you think is going to be a star player, potentially going to make a lot of money in the future, is going to have to give 10% of those earnings to that firm. I don't know if you've heard anything about it. I was just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Sal, I know all about it. In fact, I think one of the former Met executives is involved with that.
Wow.
And look, people, there's risk on both sides.
Sure.
Risk one, if the player gets hurt tomorrow,
right,
he's got the money. Okay. If the player plays really well, the investor gets the money.
Right.
I mean, it's a somewhat speculative investment that has big returns for one side or the other.
Right.
So, sometimes you bet on yourself and
right.
You know you're going to do this. And sometimes you find a player that's in need, okay, who's really, really good.
Right.
And it's up to his agent to get him a line of credit.
Sure.
And believe me, I spent an awful lot of time developing resources through our agency where they could get their own banking relationships.
Wow.
And helping them grow up a little bit, because most of them never sign checks.
Right.
So everybody's different. Our agency was full service as far as, educating.
Sure.
And helping. Not saying that there aren't a lot of them out there today that don't do the same thing.
Right.
Not being an agent anymore, just like I said, it freed up an awful lot of time. I had 3 young kids.
Nice.
And done really well.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Are you a fan of those kind of firms? Do you think there's going to be more of those pop up? And I guess with that, and you're talking about how your firm obviously made it a point to financial literacy for your clients, right? How important do you, not how important, but do you think that teams as organizations should be doing that for players once they sign, having, whether it's courses, some sort of seminars to teach, help them along the path to financial literacy? Or is it really just, you hope you get a good firm as far as like yours that are able to educate / you have to do kind of your own homework to not get taken advantage of, so to speak?
So I don't believe the teams like getting involved in that at all. Okay. I will tell you, among the amateur places, the team that has all those tournaments, or the company that has all those tournaments, Perfect Game.
Yep.
Yeah. They try like heck to do some of that.
Okay.
It's actually run by my former partner, Rick Thurman.
Wow.
He and Rob are partners, but Rick was my partner at Beverly Hills Sports Council. So some of that is carried over.
Gotcha.
I know he has meetings with parents all the time and they have, they tell them what to look for, what not to look for. But people still do the same stuff because their teammates do it.
Sure.
It's like a player switching agents. Well, why do you switch agents? Well, this veteran said that his agent's better than mine, or my agent's small and I don't think he can do this. I mean, picking an agent is more than just getting a loan from somebody.
Sure.
Picking a financial advisor should be more than just getting a loan or getting
Absolutely.
a gift or something like that.
Definitely. And just kind of the last couple questions that I had, and for you in particular, I was just wondering if you can kind of give our viewers, someone who's aspiring to break in as a sports agent, work in that realm, just kind of, in your opinion, what do you think would be the best way for someone to try to break into that realm? Obviously, going to law school, get a law degree, all that good stuff, a schooling aside, but like, doing the work, but then trying to, break into the industry.
Well, first of all, every game they watch, every game they go to, they should probably do their own scouting.
Okay.
Because if you do a little bit of an analysis
Sure.
of the draft, for example, take a look at what teams are successful, what teams are not successful. Some teams are not successful at all. If you take a look at starting lineups of a lot of teams, how many of those players did they draft? What was, did a lot of those players come from Latin America or they come from here? I mean, does the team buy players, just wait till somebody's a free agency and build their team around that? Do they wait till the trading deadline? They really need to understand the game. They need to understand what baseball arbitration is, how that works. And then the easiest part is recruiting and signing. I mean, we did an awful lot of recruiting players during winter ball.
Okay.
We go to Puerto Rico, Dominican, Venezuela, Japan. Went to Japan every year, to make nice, give gifts so my players would have places to play when they were done.
Sure.
And make sure that they understand the game. I mean, when I started out as an agent, there were agents that didn't really understand the difference between plate appearances and at-bats.
Man.
I didn't go to law school.
Okay.
Well, after I started becoming an agent, and they didn't have computers, and I couldn't go online, so I had to do it through the mail. And yet somehow it worked out. 9 years in a row, I had the biggest contracts in baseball, broke barriers.
Wow.
9 years in a row, broke barriers.
Do you have, outside of, the Bobby Bonilla contract, obviously, do you have a favorite story or, memory of a certain, representing a certain player or anything like that during your years, as an agent? Like, does one stand out above the most, like a favorite story for you?
There are plenty. There's one, since you guys are in New York, I could tell you about signing Danny Tartabull.
Okay.
So I used the Bonilla contract.
Okay.
And Mr. Steinbrenner really wanted the player. He needed the same type of player. And so it was my job to make them as comparable as humanly possible.
Sure.
Okay. And Gene, Michael, and George flew out to LA. And they were at the Century Plaza Hotel, and we spent like 3 days. And George beat the crap out of me. But we ended up making Danny Tartabull the highest paid player in the history of the American League.
Wow.
So I couldn't tell you or wouldn't tell you some of the things that went on in those talks.
Sure.
But, but I'm happy to tell you that the result was great for Tartable.
Right.
Wasn't so great for the Yankees,
Sure.
but it was a perfect fit. And I knew as an agent
Mm-hmm.
that they had to make the deal.
Got it. Do you ever feel that sometimes? Like, not that you have a team against the wall, but you know that they want to really need that certain player, and you know that. How much of an advantage is that for you as far as negotiating goes, when you know you kind of have a team in a corner like that?
It's huge. You know,
Yeah.
when you're selling, my background is selling insurance.
Yep.
And when you sell insurance, you're selling something that a person can't see, smell, feel, or hear.
Right.
So you develop certain instincts, Sal. And when you're starting to talk to the people you're negotiating with, you know how far you can go with them.
Sure.
I was not a warrior. I was not a screamer. I was not a guy that would get mad or anything like that.
Right.
I'm a sales guy.
Did you? And again, we respect George Steinbrenner. We don't give the Yankees too much run here, but I would imagine, striking a deal with a guy like that, it's got to feel like you just won a 12-round boxing match, right? Is that like the only way you could describe it?
I was worn out. He was tough. He was tough. Gene Michael, I mean, he was in there punching. One guy hit you with the left, and the other guy hit you with the right.
That's incredible. I can't even imagine. And the last question I have for you, and obviously no specifics or anything like that, obviously working with the White Sox, but just your opinion. Do you think that Shohei Ohtani is going to completely change free agency come wintertime? Is there going to be a contract that we may never see and may never see again with a player like that? I just think he's so unique, and a guy hitting the market like that, it's got to be once in a lifetime.
He's a beast. He's a beast. He's a very, very good player. Has a lot of appeal. Very consistent. He's got to stay healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Got to stay healthy. I think I know his agent really well, Ms. Burrell from CAA. He's a very competent guy, and he'll do the best he can. I'm sure there'll be a lot of teams in the mix, but I can't talk about numbers.
Sure. Absolutely. And since you said this is, I promised my last question, but you said something that it made me think of. You mentioned CAA, and obviously there was a former CAA agent, Brodie Van Wagenen, who came and ran the Mets for a couple of years. I was just wondering, in the agent community, when that happened, when Brodie Van Wagenen was named the general manager of the Mets, were people in the industry shocked? Were they upset? I just was kind of, because I know that was a unique thing for when it happened. So I was just kind of curious, what the reaction was within the industry when that happened.
I think it was known that Brodie had a relationship with the family.
Gotcha.
And it didn't surprise me necessarily. I didn't know Brodie really at all.
Got it.
And there's some people that would really like to be on the management side.
Sure.
I've worked with Jerry Reinsdorf in the White Sox now since 2002.
Wow.
And so, I mean, I think everybody is different,
Sure.
Everybody's different, just like all the players are different.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you. We don't want to keep you here all day, but again, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Everyone, it's going to be out in the next couple of days. So please, watch out for that. And the next time we talk, hopefully the Mets will win a series. Probably not, but until now and then, we'll see. Let's go Mets.
So